Geoengineering means doing things like taking the surface of the ocean and dumping iron nanoparticles onto the surface of the ocean. The nanoparticles create a nutrient base for phytoplankton. The phytoplankton, in theory, absorb carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide sinks to the bottom of the ocean with the phytoplankton. We sequester carbon dioxide, we lower ocean temperatures and atmospheric temperatures at the same time. So that's thought to be a magic bullet solution or a partial solution to climate change. The problem is, since 1990, there have been 13 governmental experiments with ocean fertilization, with this kind of geoengineering. All 13 have been failures. But they continue to suggest that this is a way we can solve the problem. All they say is, what they say is, the thing we have to do is have bigger experiments. We need to experiment over 10,000 square kilometers of ocean, or 100,000 square kilometers of ocean. Then we will know how well it works. One of the experiments conducted by the United States government was finally halted in the Southern Sea because the scientists themselves feared that they could inadvertently sterilize about half of the Pacific Ocean if the experiment continued. Other scientists said they had to stop because they could have created an ice age. But that's the kind of experimentation that is now being financially supported. The second kind of experimentation even sounds crazier. That is, we can reduce the Earth's temperature if we can simply blast nanoparticles of various materials into the sky, if we can blast them into the stratosphere like an artificial volcano, using various jets and literally cannons to do this, then we can lower the temperature. And they've actually analyzed that if they do this in the temperate zones, where I live in Canada, for example, they can lower the temperature by about 2 degrees. They can actually, because of the acid rain effect of the material falling from the sky, they can actually reduce methane generation from the defrosting Arctic for about 10 years. And they can actually somewhat reduce surface levels of oceans, very modestly. And the cost is only between $25 and $50 billion per year. So they say, compared to rescuing an automobile company or a bank, that's pretty cheap. So they want to do it. And they're right, it could happen. They could do it. The scientific evidence, Nobel laureates are working on this and say, yes, it could be done. But who decides how much? Who decides what areas will be protected? If you lower the temperatures in the temperate zones, what happens to the tropics? The calculations so far suggest that while it would work, you would have some small side effects. One of the side effects would be that you would knock the monsoons in Asia off course, and you would have massive drought in the Indian subcontinent. Another side effect would be further drought in Africa, in Sahelian Africa. A third side effect, however, would be that you would actually lower temperatures in the North Atlantic and reduce hurricane effects in Florida. And that's rather attractive if you live in Florida and nowhere else. Tragedy is that since Copenhagen, we've had major governments, the United Kingdom and the United States in particular, through parliamentary hearings in the United Kingdom and through congressional hearings in the United States, argue in favor of this. We're seeing major funding now going, particularly from the UK government, to support experiments in geoengineering. And we're having these scientists meet to tell us that don't worry, as they did with genetic engineering, they'll take care of geoengineering for us. They will control the thermostat, everything will be all right. Well, that has to be challenged by all of us. That can't be allowed to happen. They all say the same thing. It's a terrible idea, it has high risk, but we have no choice. They all say, let us do it, let us scientists make the attempt. The second initiative that I mentioned was related to the control of the world's biomass. it ties to geoengineering, because many of the ideas of geoengineering, besides those that relate to the stratosphere or the ocean surface, are initiatives that look at growing massive plantations of synthetic trees, or converting land areas into biochar, thought to be benign, but in fact on a large scale, something that can be extraordinarily dangerous. Basically, when we talk about this control of biomass, we're talking about something known as synthetic biology. Synthetic biology is hugely different from biotechnology, as we've come to know it. With biotechnology, basically we move a gene from one species to another. It's kind of simple, it's kind of stupid, it doesn't really work, but it's relatively uncomplicated for something that doesn't work. With synthetic biology, and this is where the major investments actually are, with synthetic biology, the idea is that you don't move genes around, you build your own DNA. You build it from the bottom up. Because after all, what is DNA? It's 4 sugars. It's the things we learned in school, A, C, G, and T. Just sugars. You can put them together, you can build your own base pairs, and construct exactly the kind of strips of DNA that you need to have to insert into another species, or in fact to build your entire species yourself. Scientists who are working on this at MIT, at Stanford, many other major universities, and now increasingly in private companies, are saying that it's slow work so far, but it's getting cheaper and cheaper all the time. And in fact, we can do this. We can build anything. At a meeting of the Biodiversity Convention of the United Nations 2 years ago, synthetic biologists came to meet with governments in Rome to their scientific committee and said, don't worry if you lose biological diversity. We'll build it for you. We can build life ourselves. The hubris is amazing, but they actually do believe it's possible. And like biotechnology, they'll get it about half right. It'll be just successful enough to make money and just bad enough to destroy our environment. But that's the strategy they're pursuing. And is it serious? 3 minutes. If it's real, is it real? Look who's funding it. The U.S. Department of Energy, in the level of more than $1 billion last year for the first time. British Petroleum, or BP, and Exxon, to the level of in excess of $1 billion last year. So the major oil companies, all of the major chemical companies, BASF, Bayer, DuPont, heavily funding it, Monsanto as well, companies you know and love here in Brazil, Bunge, Cargill, Monsanto again, Syngenta again, all heavily involved in developing synthetic biology. They argue that, in fact, they can make more artificial biological diversity, more unnatural biological diversity in a test tube than exists in the Amazon today that's natural. And again, at one level, they're right. 20 years ago, we talked about the danger of the gene giants. Today, we talk about the new biomasters, the ones who want to control the biomass of the planet. And it's fascinating to go to the meetings. It's fascinating to talk to the major companies about this, because they no longer talk about plant breeding to feed the hungry, or plant breeding even to feed our cars. They talk about plant breeding, or synthetic biology really, to simply produce biomass. Because at the end of the day, you can turn the carbohydrates, the basic carbon of the living plants, or trees, or whatever, into whatever you want to. You can either make them food, or feed, or fuel, or plastics, or cosmetics, or anything else that we've known fossil fuels to make in the past. So they see this as the future. Well, again, as much as we have to fight against the biopiracy of geoengineering, we have to fight against the manipulations of synthetic biology and the new biomasters. These enclosures of our commons have to be challenged today. It's especially important to say this here in Brazil, and I won't go over time. It's important to say this here in Brazil because two of the major companies working on synthetic biology have moved here to Brazil. Both of them are proposing to have major commercial plants operating using sugarcane and maize here in Brazil next year. They're both working in the Sao Paulo area. They're both heavily funded by the major corporations and supported by the Brazilian government. You here in Brazil will be the guinea pigs for the new biomasters. And they will experiment on the Amazon and your lands. So the time is now to fight these issues, not later. We can. We have the ability to do that. We have the resources to do that. We in civil society, the World Social Forum, can make a difference in challenging these crazy new technologies. But if you thought 20 or 30 years ago that biotechnology was crazy, yes, it was. You were right, but it happened. Today, in the same way, biopiracy and synthetic biology are realities that are coming, and they have to be resisted. Thank you for your time.